However, the first one, international migration, so it immediately shifts to international migration, has grown in volume since 1945. So now we have limited the whole history to the last, what is it, 70, 80 years. And most particularly since the mid-1980s. So we're now back to a window of 35 years. Migration ranks as one of the most important factors of global change. So here, globalization is seen as a very recent phenomenon and in junction with migration. So I think this sums up very well the problem in many social sciences, who, although they have some realization that migration is not something entirely new, but it really becomes interesting and important in our own time. And I think this is very problematic. Well, the most fundamental attack, you could say, although it's not written as an attack, but to this very heliocentric kind of approach is this book by Frederick Manning. It's the second edition from 2013. The original is from 2005. And this is a 200-page textbook which explains how migration has been a systemic element of human societies for, well, since human societies exist. And he is especially interested in how migration is related to social and cultural change. And so his argument in this book, very basically in one sentence, is that if you want to understand changes, social changes, or changes within human societies, then migration is key. Basically, he starts and he uses all kind of linguistic evidence, but also anthropological and archaeological evidence to show, and also DNA evidence to show how migration has started, let's say, within Africa, and some 60,000 years ago, people have moved out. So you could say, nous sommes tous des Africains. Yeah? So this is well known. The Out of Africa thesis, I mean, and this is being reworked almost on an everyday basis, because more and more of this evidence and the timing, etc., is now being studied. But this is basically, let's say, the picture from 60,000 years before current era, how human beings have spread over the world and have become also very different in how we look, in how we think, in our technologies, etc. So this is a history of first enormous diversification, and well, depending on how you measure, let's say from 10,000 years ago or so, or 5,000 years ago, this has slowly we are slowly starting to converge again, and migration is again, let's say, the key force of this convergence, because more and more people meet and now migrate to each other. You see that this leads to converging effects. For example, the fact that I can speak English here and most of you will understand, or English and French, which have become kind of global languages, that in itself already shows this convergence. So how does Manning conceptualize migration? Well, in his book, he distinguishes four main types of migration. One is what he calls home community migration, which I have bluntly translated communauté domicile, or communauté de souche. So this migration within your own cultural zone. So you might migrate, but you meet people whose language you already speak, who have a similar family system, same kind of values, etc. But still, it's migration. Then there's colonization, which Manning defines as part of a community who settles their own community somewhere else, like the Greeks did in the Black Sea area, for example. So there's these are not the colonizers as we know them, but so in kind of empty spaces, although these spaces are never really empty. Then there's whole community migration, where the entire community moves, like in nomadic circumstances, for example, so community entière, to translate that maybe. And then, and this is what the book mostly is about, is when people cross cultural boundaries. Migration traversée des cultures. So this is what he says, and this is specific for humans, because all the other and expressions of migration. He said this, you see this in the natural world as well. Whales, they can travel for thousands and thousands of miles. Whenever they meet another whale, it's more or less the same. They will not learn something new from the other whale because they are still in the same community. And as I said, this cross-community phenomenon is specific for human beings, and it has very much to do with the fact that we have developed language. And through language, well, we have developed ideas, and through this, all kinds of cultural differences have arisen. And this makes, let's say, this cross-cultural migration very interesting, because as I said, Manning's thesis is cross-cultural migrations lead to social change. This can be very negative change, by the way. I mean, you can also kill the other one, or repress, or exploit, etc. But it's still change, yeah? So then he goes on to differentiate 4 types of cross-cultural migrations. So now we're only talking about humans, not about whales or birds anymore. So he said then, so we have the settlers, you could say the colons, so those who really settle in a different community. Colons may be not the best translation, because it's not only about them being also on top of it, but you can also join another community, like most migrants do. And let's say French go to the United States, well, they have to conform to the existing rules, etc. But of course, you can also think of other kinds of migration. So these are the settlers, these are the types of migrants we often think of when it's about international migration. 50 million Europeans who moved to the New World, for example, in the 19th century. Then you have the sojourners, those who have the idea to return. So this is a term very much developed in the case of Chinese migrants in Southeast Asia. So those who also, sometimes over generations may stay in a different country, but still have this link to the whole community, and still have this aspiration maybe to go back sometime. So this also goes with your tree example, maybe in your paper. Then you have the itinerants, those who move between communities. Gypsies, for example, might be, or nomads in general. And then he distinguishes real invaders. So these are people who do migrate somewhere else, but who have so much more power that they can set the rules. Yeah? Like many Europeans did in many parts of the world. So this is how and of course these types have very different effects on what kind of social change will take place. So what Manning offers us is more or less a lens to look at global history through the movement of people. Yeah, we can use all kind of other lenses. Yeah? We can use the lens of looking at merchants and goods, and we can use the lens of how capitalist systems and mechanisms work. But this is one lens that offers us, I think, a very interesting view in how global history can be studied. And this was, let's say, Manning was very inspirational for me, but also for my brother Jan LUCCASEN, with whom I collaborate when it comes to migration studies. And so what we did is to develop Manning's ideas further in order to make it work, because Manning has a very long time scale, and we thought, okay, let's limit ourselves to the last 5 centuries. So how would this play out if we use these kinds of ideas in order to think of a new way of looking at migration and also make it comparable in order so to see what it does, so what the relationship again is between cross-cultural migrations and social change. So this is a book from 2014 in which we use an edited volume in which we ask scholars, so we developed this on the basis of Europe, and I'll show you in a moment, to say, okay, does this work also for your part of the world? So we have specialists on China, Adam McKeown, for example, specialists on Japan, on India, on Russia, the entire, also the Asian part of Russia, to see whether our way of typologizing migration also works in that part of the world. So for this typology, and this, for those of you who cannot afford this very expensive Brill book from 2014, There is a paper in Social Science History, a journal that we published a year ago, theorizing cross-cultural migration. So those of you who cannot reach the original, just send me an email, I'll send you the PDF so you can look for yourself. So basically, yes, I'm going to wait for the touristic photographs of this. So basically what we argue is this, and again, it's very much borrowed from Manning's ideas, is that if you want to measure cross-cultural migrations, we also distinguish 4 types, but we have done it in a little bit different way than Manning does, and we've chosen 4 types of which we know that we also have sources or ways to measure them to some extent. Yeah? So we say there are, let's say, more or less permanent cross-cultural migrations and there are more or less temporal cross-cultural migrations. The permanent ones, and then it comes to what is a cultural boundary. Yeah? And as we argue, we are it's not so much the international boundaries, but if you go back in time, people who move from the countryside to cities, they really cross a cultural boundary. Because cities have different rules and different sets of ideas, different technologies often than villages have. So it's very interesting to see, let's say, who moves to cities, in what quantities, and how this plays out if you compare that in a global perspective. Then you can look at colonization, which is people moving to land, yeah? From the countryside to the countryside. Often in empires, people moving to the frontiers. Yeah? So many Russians, many Chinese, for example, in their history moved north and west. Yeah? Because millions and millions. But of course, because they enter different ecological spaces. Also for them, this was also met with people with different linguistic and religious backgrounds. This also meant, although you stayed in the countryside, this meant crossing a cultural boundary as well. If you look at the more temporal expressions of cross-cultural migrations, we're very interested in what we call seasonal migrations, so often peasants who move for part of the year somewhere else to earn money and then come back to their own plot of land. But it can also be work and construction in cities, for example. So this is, but here of course people move from very peasant kind of situation to very monetized kind of economies. Also this has it means crossing cultural boundaries. And then there's a multi-annual category, so people stay away for more than a year, often years. So it can be sailors, it can be soldiers, so people who enlist, earn money, but do not plan to stay away forever. Well, some of them may do in the end, but let's say this is how we, so if you want to quantify cross-cultural migrations, you have to count all these 4, depending on a unit of analysis, which can be a region, can be a country, can be a continent if you want. And that allows you, let's say, to understand how, let's say, cross-cultural migration and intensity of cross-cultural migration develops over time. And even in order to really stress the fact that it is important to have very clear definitions and how you measure them. So in a 2009 paper in the Journal of Global History, we formalized it in a formula, which I will not explain for reasons of time. But what does it mean if you then apply it to, and we did it here, so this is from the 2014 book. So these are just basic ratios, and they're very conservative estimates, by the way. So here we compare Europe, without Russia, by the way, China and Japan. Because for these blocks, we have reasonable estimates of these 4 types of cross-cultural migrations, which are now all lumped together in one figure. Yeah? So this is the proportion of the population that at least has experienced one of these cross-cultural migrations in their lives. So here this is interesting for global history, also when we think of, for example, the discussion about the great divergence, why Europe developed much more quickly in economic terms from the 18th century onwards than, for example, China. Well, many of you will know this discussion, but Ken Pomeranz started with this book, The Great Divergence, now almost 20 years ago. So here, this allows us to look at this great diversion from the perspective of cross-cultural migrations. And here you see that at least until 1700, these three parts of the world, they do not differ much. But from the 18th century onwards, you see that cross-cultural migrations go down in East Asia, and they go up in Europe. And only, let's say, in a very recent period, especially when it comes to China, and of course then the enormous migrations to Chinese cities, then explain, let's say, how China then develops in this respect. And so that is very much linked also to the economic developments in China itself. So this is a way, it's a very rough way, and you can, but it's a way to conceptualize cross-cultural migrations and link it also to larger debates. As I said, this is lumping together all these different types of cross-cultural migration. So you can also differentiate. And this is what we did, and I'm very grateful to Adam McKeown, who unfortunately died not too long ago. He was a great scholar. So this is what you see here. This is Europe. Yeah. So this is, and these are the, let's say, the 6 types, including immigration and immigration of cross-cultural migrations in these 2 big areas. So, so this shows that it's not only important to look at the total rate, but also how it's composed. Okay? So, and here you see that for Europe, urbanization, people moving to cities, is very dominant. Whereas for China, yeah, it's difficult to see, but colonization has been very dominant for a very long time. And only in the last century, you see here of course the very spectacular move to cities in China. So, and this then forces us to think, okay, so what could be the different kind of effects of the different types of cross-cultural migrations? And you could argue that moving to cities in the European case already early on has led to more social change. Because cities are very intense areas where very intense interactions between people, and that this has more social change kind of effects than, for example, colonization has. So this is the kind of where you could develop these ideas further. So to summarize these migrations and also what it does, both to the societies where the migrants leave, but also an end for the societies where they end. So the permanent, so the 2 cities migration, and again, this can be, often this is internal migration, yeah, when people move into cities. The difference, the cities offer different kinds of institutions. Families are less important, for example, than in the countryside. There's much more of a public sphere, there's much more of a money or wage economy. It allows much more the coexistence of subcultures, for example. As I said, when it comes to colonization from land to land, ecology differs, but also the language and cultures of those who were already there. And of course, we are also talking about power relations. Often these people who move to the frontiers have invested more power in them, also by the imperial regimes. Seasonal migration is very important, not only for what it does to where the seasonal migrants go, but especially how it changes home communities, because it funnels back all kind of monetary money to, let's say, the community where these migrants come from, and also exacerbates often social inequalities within, whether we like that or not. And then there are what I call here organizational migrants. So these are the multi-annual. And I think, and I developed this in a paper for the Journal of World History, that these are migrants whose migratory behavior is not primarily determined by themselves, but by the organizations that they have joined, voluntarily or coerced. You even say that chattel slaves, so people who are enslaved by slavers and then sold to plantations, for example, are a type of organizational migrants, because it's, let's say, this enslaving organization and the enslaving plantation owners who decide whether they move or not. Even once they have arrived at a plantation, for example, in the American South, and also in Sven's book on cotton, this is touched upon how slaves at plantation in the north of the south of the US are then massively moved to the south of the US because of cotton production in that area. So this is also migration. People move from one place to another, not because they want to sell, because the organization, well, this is plantation as an organization, but of course, very good examples are the army. It's not that the soldier thinks, well, let's go and fight tomorrow in Gambia. No, it's the army who will instruct you whether to do this or not. The same is true for sailors, and also many what we now call experts, people in service of an organization or a company, where the company's interests are steering whether people go and where they might go. And these organizational migrants are especially interesting because they have a lot of power and they have a lot of status. So when you're interested in the relationship between migration and social change, these organizational migrants, and often they're not conceived as migrants in migration history or in global history at all, but I think they should, because they are key for a lot of these changes, again, whether we think these changes are nice or not. So this is a clumsy French translation for those of you who would like to have this, let's say, summarize this argument. So just to give you an example, a more recent example of these this type of migration within this typology. Well, let's move to China. This is a well-known story. Often when we think of migration, let's say these are internal migrants. Yeah, I'm not sure, by the way, whether they leave the city or go to the city. I could not make that up from this photograph. It doesn't really matter. But China is, of course, very, very interesting if you see the enormous migrations. Yeah, let's say the amount of the share of the floating population in the Chinese, which is almost 1/4 of the population. So people moving from the countryside to cities, often traveling thousands of miles. And of course, China is a very multicultural country. Well, we don't have to explain that to our colleagues from Shanghai. Many languages, many religions, many cultural codes that also differ. And why this should be conceived as cross-cultural migration is because of these different languages, different religions, but also different ways of doing in the countryside where they come from, and the city to where they move. Moreover, they are treated differently than the urbanites themselves. This well-known hubu system gives them only limited rights in the city. So they're very comparable to international migrants, for example, in other parts of the world. And the interesting thing is, an anthropologist has been doing interesting work on this, is what is then the effect of these cross-cultural migrations, of these, let's say, peasants moving to cities, also many women who do this, is that the traditional Chinese family system, where the families would decide with whom you marry, and especially, let's say, the paterfamilias, is to some extent crumbling or changing, because now young people tend to decide more themselves whom they would choose as their partner for life, for example. So here you see that this also has immediate effects on, let's say, traditions that may have been for centuries, but because of this very intense cross-cultural migration, this immediately has also cultural effects and cultural changes that take place, apart from all kinds of monetary, economic changes that it involves. So I think this movement, this mass movement, and I think really unprecedented in scale in world history, what we've seen since the 1980s in China, is also a very good example why we should not limit ourselves to international migration when we really want to understand what the effect of cross-cultural migrations is. Another example that I like very much is, and again this has to do with temporary migrations, is a number of studies on American GIs who were sent out for 1 or 2 years especially to Europe, but also to Japan after World War II. So we're now talking about occupation armies, so they had their bases, military bases all over the world, and they would send out Americans, both white and black. Yeah? But especially the African American soldiers, and let's say the effect that this temporary stay elsewhere had on them are very interesting. So what you see here is what you would not see in Alabama. Yeah? So having white women and black men very near, and this is the fairground, and this is exactly what these African American GIs experienced when they were in Germany. Although they were German base, was their own institution at the base, but they would also venture out. They would also date German women, and hey, what they there experience is a non-segregated society. Although it used to be the most racial state in the world only a year or 5 years ago, from 1945 onwards, they realized that what they had been used to in the US South, or even in the US North, as a very segregated Jim Crow kind of society, which of course they resented, but well, they thought, well, bad luck. I mean, this is apparently how the world works for us. But being abroad, and even 1 month would be enough. But most of these men, we talk about men here, stayed for 2 years. And this really changed how they look at the world. So they wrote letters home. We have these letters saying, well, hey, we can just date a white woman not getting lynched. I mean, so they saw how unjust the system was, and that it was not necessarily so. And there are some very interesting books that have been published, namely, especially this Breath of Freedom, who show how this experience, this temporary experience of being in a very different cultural situation, had a big impact on American society. So thousands of these black GIs, they joined the NAACP. They were very instrumental also in the movement against racism, which started in the 1950s and 60s. So if you really want to understand this specific part of American history, these massive temporary migrations are key. So we're talking here about a multi-annual, people stay away 1 or 2 years, organized in this case by the army. So this shows us also that migration offers us a possibility to open up national history in a very interesting way. Right? Because if you look at the history of the US in the 1960s and 70s, it's mostly described internally, what happened within the US, and of course slavery, etc. And it's all important. But this offers you some very fresh air into, let's say, the American experience, and showing how temporary migrations, how they play into this. And I think this really offers us a very interesting perspective. And here you see, let's say, how the battle against racism, against segregation, and you cannot understand this without these massive temporary migrations of US African American US soldiers. So this brings me to, and if you have to remind me if I'm through with my time, to a way to conceptualize migration in a different way, especially if we take this institutional logic seriously. So here we have the skills on the one hand and institutional logic on the other hand. So very limited and very strong. So this is, let's say, the category of migrants that we mostly study. Yeah? So mostly people with low skills and where institutional logic is also weak or absent. So these are, let's say, the Italians who went from Italy to Buenos Aires or to New York, for example. So this, I think 90% of migration studies is about this box. Yeah? But if you open it up in a way that we try to do in this cross-cultural migration way, and using this idea of organizational migrants, then 3 very different types of migrants become visible. So not only, let's say, those who are not sent by an institution, but who have higher skills, other qualifications, let's say the American community in Paris, for example, from the 1920s onwards, which had a big impact on also French culture and on what happened in the city. But also, of course, corporate expatriates, aid workers, diplomats, missionaries. Missionaries are a very interesting type of migrants, or colonial civil servants from the metropole, and then the organizational migrants like soldiers and sailors that I mentioned before. So, les qualifications et les logiques institutionnelles, ce sont les deux sphères qui sont importantes. Et alors, les migrants qualifiés et peu qualifiés, et aussi les migrants organisationnels qualifiés et peu qualifiés. Alors ça, c'est une manière d'approcher le phénomène de l'immigration à un autre différent que traditionnel. Well, to continue very briefly with these, let's say, these high-skilled organizational migrants, and I think, if we want to understand social changes, again, and often social changes that have led to more social inequality and also to racism, etc., but they are still social changes, and Anna Farouki yesterday has also talked about this. So missionaries, of course, you need not many missionaries to have a big impact, for example, because they are invested with power and with status and often backed up by the military, of course, which also often are migrants. And the same as people who work for big corporations or for aid workers, for example. So I think this really offers us a new way, and these are very contemporaneous examples, but this is very easy to historicize as well, right? As long as you follow this kind of conceptualization. So to summarize, our argument is that if you really are interested in how in social change or in development, you could also look at development, it's not only important to differentiate between different types of cross-cultural migrations, and they also, I mean, we still have to work on, let's say, whether two cities has a greater effect than urbanization, for example. If you mix this, or if you combine this, let's say, with the migrants' capital, and different kinds of capital, human capital, social, cultural capital, but that's only the start. What is in the middle is what we could call membership regimes, or regime partenaires. So what are the rules of, let's say, the society where you end up as a soldier, as an aid worker, as a low-skilled labor migrant? So to what extent do you become a member of this society? Or are you really, so what is the access to the membership regime? So the more limited the membership is, the more limited the access is, the less the influence will be on social change. Because you're very limited in the interactions and you have much less power. So membership regimes are crucial in order to understand how migration then exactly influences these societies where the migrants come, and also where they come from themselves. And to give just some very brief examples, and then I'll stop. I already mentioned this. So the Hugo system in China offers migrants very limited rights. They can go there, they are welcome, and they can work hard. But if they want to send their children to school, they would pay 5 times as much as, let's say, those who have the rights in the city themselves. So this means that they are kind of second-class citizens in these cities, and often their interactions are limited to their own, let's say, their own group. Another example, again, a contemporary example, Asian workers in the Gulf states. Also, they're regular, they're legal, they are welcome, and they can work hard. But also, they have even more limited rights than, let's say, the Chinese who come from the countryside. They can never settle for good, and they are always disposable. They get paid very low, and they will never become citizens. So this is they get they have very limited rights in the societies that they move to. And also here you could argue that the effect on the la société d'accueil is very limited. But the effect, of course, on the society where they come from may be quite big because of money being sent back and also learning different kinds of cultural elements. Well, we talked about Africans, and as we all know, most of people within this large continent of Africa move within the continent, and they don't move out. But of course, there's a few who do go, for example, to Europe. Well, some of them have visa and their passports, and they fly to European airports, and they are full members of European societies. But of course, there are also millions of especially sub-Saharan African migrants who are irregular migrants, and they practically have no right. Yeah? And they're in a very vulnerable position because they can be exposed as irregular or illegal, as it is called in the European terms, at any moment. Of course, this has effects. Again, more on the societies where people come from than on the societies where they go. Well, the most important effect on the society where they go is that we pay very little money for our canned tomatoes. But of course, the interactions of these migrants with, let's say, the Europeans is very limited to mostly a very abusive employer. And then finally, if you look, if you think in these terms of this membership regime, and this is also from a piece I did in the Oxford Handbook of World Cities from 2013, where I used this idea of membership regimes and these differentiations in membership regimes. And then I argue that there are also parts of the world, and I think sub-Saharan Africa and also India would be examples of this. Yes, so people can move to cities. Okay, I mean, these are internal migrations often, but hey, the city has very little or nothing to offer in terms of rights, bundles of rights, etc. So you got to say for them it's more or less an anti-membership regime. Yeah, say so they're completely dependent upon their own networks, often ethnic networks, and often they keep on moving between the countryside and the city because they have to spread their risks, and often they have some plot of land, or they diversify their activities. So here you see, let's say, an example of anti-membership regimes, which you can see in many African cities, but also in Indian cities like New Delhi or Calcutta or Bombay. And of course, also this has implications for to what extent these cross-cultural migrations lead to social changes. And also here, let's say, the amount of segregation is enormous, especially socio-economic. So yes, there are changes, but they are different than when migrants who move to cities immediately get full access to rights, etc., and where there's a much more equal interaction of people with different cultural backgrounds. So I think I'll leave it at this. So it's only a call to, if you really want to, and that may also mean that if, and as I remarked in the panel 2 days ago, reading through the papers of this conference, almost in all papers I could, if I put my cross-cultural migration lens on the paper, it would be very clear, let's say, where the migratory aspects were. And some of the people do talk about migration, so make it explicit. But it's a very interesting way to look at global history, and I think it really helps us to understand phenomena that we think we have looked at from all sides, offers us new perspectives and also new ideas of why things have changed. And I think I leave it at that. Thank you very much. So the former I would say it's both. I mean, it's both a result and because they're so linked. when it comes to changes in family systems through migration, and they're all over the place. Also, for example, if you look at what used to be guest workers from Morocco or Turkey, who've moved to European countries like Germany and the Netherlands and France, also their family systems do change. I mean, whether they like it or not. For China, it's I think a bit early to say. I only read a couple of anthropological studies who are studying these young people in cities, and so these are very qualitative kind of studies, very interesting, showing how at least mentally they think, well, why should we have, let's say, our parents decide who we marry? And maybe in the end they still will do, but also there is more neo-local kind of relationships which are more detached from the family influence, which is also easier because the family is far away. Yeah? So how this will play out, it's that I cannot say. I mean, we really have to wait for that, but I predict that they will, because of the magnitude and the intensities of these, let's say, cross-cultural countryside city migrations, and also the opportunities that the city offers to these migrants, although it's limited because many of them still have their huku in the countryside. But I would not be surprised if, let's say, this will lead in a very short and historical term, let's say within 50 years, one or two generations, that this has major effects.
There is the issue I want to figure out. You just stand up the residency, the regime of residency. Our government is trying to improve the regime of residency.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, they want to become more inclusive.
You just said the membership of the immigrants. So I want to say that our government is trying to improve the residency region. So the people, the parents from the rural areas and other people, they are not urban people. Other non-urban people are more and more adopting to the urban life, and they are getting more and more right in the urban areas.
So this is basically history what you're saying, so that we should not see this as a static thing. So membership regimes can change over time, and also sometimes in a very quickly, because we're talking here about almost 40, even not 40 years. And yes, I know that not only the Chinese government, but also cities themselves. Some cities, they see that it is in their interest to become less limited, than other cities, depending very much on economic factors. So it's partly decided by, so there are also already differences in this ecosystem from city to city, as you know, of course. I mean, you're more knowledgeable about this than I am. I only know this from reading. But I also, that this has become a concern to the central government as well. Again, I think also very much for economic reasons, that they see, let's say, what the negative effects of more limited membership regimes can be. So it's, let's say, the larger lesson that draws from your question is that we should always conceive membership regimes as evolving in time. Some of them can be very stubborn, can be resistant to change, but often they do change. And of course, then that is interesting to see what then, let's say, the consequences of these changes are. So the book that I chose from 2014, the chapter on Japan I did with 2 Japanese scholars, which, by the way, is also a very interesting example of how you can do global history. So, because we did have a chapter on Japan, but we were not satisfied with that at all. So then I thought, okay, we want to have Japan in, so I did a kind of very rough kind of first version on the basis of secondary English, French literature on my take on what was happening according to our model in Japan. And then I sent it to two Japanese scholars just to get feedback. And from one of them, Osamu Saito, which is a very famous economic historian in Japan, he sent me an email of 20 pages, comments. Very constructive, and then I said, I'm so grateful, but I can only accept it if you accept to be co-author of this chapter. So, and then we sent versions, because he really knows Japan. I mean, I know nothing about Japan, but I had the perspective, and he had the knowledge, and he was drawn to the perspective. So this was a very, I met him only later, when the chapter was already published. So this is also a very interesting way of how you can do global history by interacting with, because you have different things to offer. Yeah? And so this led us to a very elaborate chapter on Japan, where especially, let's say, these people moving to cities, seasonal migrations, very much like China about cross-cultural migration within Japan. Not so much people moving to Japan, well, this is a more very recent phenomenon. So that's how we did Japan. And for me, this was a very interesting experience. But again, this has also larger implications for how we do global history. Thank you. Yeah, that's a good addition of what I said, I think. But again, I have to refer to Madame McKeown's chapter in our book, who shows especially the importance of these colonial migrations, so of colonizing, so that there's millions and millions of Chinese in the 17th and 18th century, also the 19th, moving to the north and to the west of China, and populating these very sparsely populated parts of the country, and also the effects on these cross-cultural effects on the country as a whole. Maybe we should have coffee now?
Thank you.